Are you tired of jumping between apps all day? Manually copying and pasting information, setting reminders and calendar appointments, and moving data around? Imagine having a personal assistant who could handle much of that repetitive, time-consuming work for you around the clock, whether you're in front of your computer or not. That's what n8n is for. n8n is a powerful open-source workflow automation tool that connects all the apps you use together so you can do things like send yourself an email message when someone uploads a file to your Dropbox, automatically generate and post content to your social media accounts, or add data from an online form into a spreadsheet, and then send yourself a Slack message letting you know that new form data has been submitted. And the best part, you can do this without writing a single line of code. Hi, I'm Garrick, and today we're going to look at how to build your first n8n workflow from scratch with no coding required. Let's start by pointing our web browser at n8n.io, which is the official central hub for n8n. Here you can learn what n8n is, explore its features, and read documentation. You can click Pricing up here to see the different available plans for the two main ways you can use n8n. Cloud hosting here at n8n.io, or self-hosting. And while n8n.io is the official home, it's not the only place you can host your workflows, as we'll see shortly. But just to give you an idea, under cloud hosting you can see there's a starter plan and a pro plan. And these are good for solo users or small teams. One of the advantages of n8n cloud hosting is that you don't have to worry about server setup or maintenance, as that's all handled for you on their end. But there are a couple of trade-offs. First, it can get expensive as your automations grow. Cloud plans usually come with limitations on executions. Notice the starter plan has 5 concurrent executions, the pro plan has 20 concurrent executions. Basically, every time a workflow runs from start to finish, whether it's grabbing an email attachment or posting to social media, that counts as one execution. If you're running a lot of automations every day, you can hit those limits pretty quickly. You also have fewer customization options with cloud hosting. You usually can't install extra tools, change performance settings, or fine-tune the environment. Now, the other option is self-hosted, which gives you full control over your server in terms of where it runs, what resources it has, and what's installed on it. Here at n8n.io, the self-hosted pricing is geared towards organizations with bigger budgets, but many people choose self-hosting because it can also be a more affordable option if you use another hosting provider or even host it yourself on your own hardware. So you don't have to sign up here at n8n.io to use a self-hosted server, as there are less expensive options available elsewhere, especially if you're just getting started with learning n8n. But the trade-off is that self-hosting can be more technical. If we come up to the Docs menu and choose Self-Host n8n, we can see the documentation on how to configure n8n for self-hosting on your own server at home or at your office. n8n does recommend using a Docker installation for self-hosting, which is basically a container that bundles n8n with everything it needs to run consistently across different environments. So you can see the instructions here are kind of technical and require you to type commands into a terminal window. Now, there are dedicated hosting services where you can create self-hosting servers instead of setting up your own server, which we can see if we toggle open Server Setups over here on the left navigation area. But you can see in the documentation when I select some of these that the instructions here are fairly technical and involve using the command line. And that might feel a little intimidating if you're just starting out. That's why many people look for managed hosting services that make self-hosting easier. So to sum up, cloud hosting is easy but can be expensive and has some limitations, while self-hosting is flexible but can be a bit technical. The good news is there are services that give you the best of both worlds, control and flexibility without all the setup headaches. Let's take a look at one of those services next. So again, cloud hosting offers convenience and ease of use, while self-hosting provides greater control and flexibility, but requires more technical knowledge. Fortunately, if you're just getting started with n8n and are interested in self-hosting, you can use a service like Hostinger, our sponsor for this video, to set up a virtual private server, also known as a VPS. This gives you the benefits of self-hosting, control and flexibility, without having to worry about the technical aspects of setting it up on a physical server, and without the need to type any complicated commands into a terminal window. Let's open up another tab and go to hostinger.com/start n8n. Hostinger offers a full range of hosting, website building, and domain management services, but what we're interested in here is self-hosting n8n on a VPS. Essentially, this is a service where you get n8n pre-installed in a Docker environment, so you don't have to worry about knowing how to do any of that initial setup. You still get the full capabilities of n8n that you would by self-hosting anywhere else, but here it's all set up for you, so all you have to do to get started is pick your plan. And you can see here that compared to the cost we just saw at n8n.io, the hosting plans here are significantly less expensive, and you get unlimited executions. So this can be a great way to dip your toes into n8n workflows without a large upfront investment. If you're just getting started, the entry-level KVM1 and KVM2 plans are more than enough to run basic automations and workflows, so I suggest starting there, with the KVM2 plan offering the best value in that range, since it doubles everything from the KVM1 plan for a few dollars more per month. If you find that you're really getting into things and running a lot of complex workflows, or need to handle a large volume of triggers, you can always upgrade to one of the other plans to further increase RAM, storage, and the power of the CPUs to keep your automations running smoothly. So just click Choose Plan, and make sure you have the 24-month option selected for the best value. For even more of a discount, click Have a Coupon Code, and enter the code STARTN8N for an additional 10% off. Now, if you want, you can add the daily auto backup option, but below that, you're prompted to pick a location for the VPS. If you're setting up your n8n server for yourself, pick the location geographically closest to you, which should be selected by default. And that gives you the lowest latency and best performance. If you're setting it up for someone somewhere else in the world, pick the location closest to them. Next, you'll pick the operating system to install on your server. Notice Application and n8n are already selected. You can also type n8n into the Search OS field to see all of the current n8n options. So currently, Hostinger offers 3 n8n templates. The one labeled just n8n is the standard setup and gives you a clean installation of n8n that's ready for use for everyday automations. If you want to just jump into building workflows, this is the one you'll choose most often. The one labeled n8n plus 100 workflows is the same installation, but you'll also be able to view over 100 of the most popular workflows created by others, which you can modify for your own needs. It's also a great way to learn how to build workflows or to get inspiration for creating your own. The third option, n8n queue mode, is more for situations where you need to run a lot of workflows at the same time. It's the scalable option for when you need to work with teams or production systems, probably not the one you'll need if you're just starting out. So again, we could just choose the regular n8n template, but let's go with the plus 100 workflows version so we can look at some examples of workflows. I'll confirm that. Then click Continue, and then follow the steps to register with Hostinger and purchase your plan. Once you've gone through that process, you'll be walked through some additional setup steps. For example, here you're prompted to set up the root password for your VPS. Now, this is not your Hostinger password. This is basically the admin password you'll use if you ever have to make specific changes to the VPS, like installing different software or managing the server configuration in other ways. You'll want to make it something strong and secure and make sure you remember it or store it in a password manager. But you won't need this password to use n8n day-to-day in your browser. You'll only need it to make changes to the VPS hosting your n8n instance, which you probably won't have to do very often at all. So I'll just click Next. Here you may see some additional features. For example, here we have the malware scanner, which is free, so I'll just leave that checked and click Finish Setup. It'll then take a few minutes to set up your VPS. And once the setup is complete, click Manage VPS to access your new n8n instance. You can see it here at the top of the screen, and we'll click Manage App to go into it. The first time you access it, you'll be prompted to create the owner account. So this is the account you'll use to get into your n8n installation. So fill out the info here, create a password, and click Next. You'll be asked a couple of questions here. You can just fill them out as needed. And then you'll see this offer to unlock more features for free by providing your email to receive a license key. So it's free and it's a lifetime license, so it's probably worth it. Just fill out your email address and click Send me a free license key. And once you've done that, your server is set up and you're ready to start creating n8n workflows. Okay, so again, because we chose the n8n plus 100 template when we set up our VPS, here we see this extensive list of example workflows we can examine and use. You can see currently these are in the order of when they were last updated, but you can also sort these by when they were last created or alphabetically. You can also use the search field or the filter button to search for specific terms or tags to narrow down the list. But just as an example, here's one called Gmail AI Autoresponder. Create draft replies to incoming emails. I'll click that one. So this is what an n8n workflow looks like. It's extremely visual, and the nice thing about most of these templates is that there are notes here that indicate how the workflow works and is laid out. In this example, you can see that it tells you when I receive an email that needs a reply, it will generate a reply, and then save it as a draft so I can review what's written before sending it out. And the way you build a workflow is by dragging in these individual blocks called nodes. Each node represents a step in the workflow, and you're free to move them around and rearrange them as necessary. The workflows all start with a trigger, which specifies what has to happen in order to start the workflow running. In this case, there's a Gmail trigger, and if I double-click it, I can see it has the parameter set to check my Gmail account every minute, but we can change that setting here if we want to. If we look at the next step in the workflow, we can see that this node assesses if the message needs a reply. And it does this using AI to read the message and make that judgment for you. In this case, the node is connected to OpenAI ChatGPT, which analyzes the content of the email and returns an answer like, yes, this needs a response, or no, it doesn't. The result then flows into the next node, so if it determines that the message needs a reply, it again uses ChatGPT to compose the response. And you do have your choice of AI models for your workflows if you prefer one other than ChatGPT. The response is then saved to your drafts folder so you can review and edit it before hitting send yourself. So that's a basic n8n workflow that you can examine and customize for yourself. Now you may be wondering how this workflow gains access to your Gmail account. It's not as simple as providing it your password. In fact, the method it uses is much more secure than that, but we'll get into how that works shortly. For now, just bear in mind that you have to give specific permissions for apps to access your Gmail or other accounts, and you can make sure it only has the ability to perform certain actions. Let's go ahead and exit this workflow without making any changes. I'll just click Overview to go back. And we won't bother saving this workflow since we were just examining it. And let's check out another one. Here's one called Personalized AI Tech Newsletter using RSS, OpenAI, and Gmail. All right, so we can see right away that this is a much more involved workflow with several more nodes than we saw in the last one. But again, the nice thing about a lot of these templates is that the people who create and share them often leave detailed notes about how the workflow works. You can see this one even features a How It Works section as well as a How to Use section that you can read through. Notice there are even highlights around the nodes that you need to edit to customize this workflow for yourself. We can see these Edit This areas. But essentially, this workflow runs in two parts. Every day, it pulls articles from tech RSS feeds that you specify in this second node, and then stores them in a searchable database. And then once a week, the AI agent goes through the database, summarizes the top stories in the chosen topics I've specified in the second Edit This area, and then emails me a clean, easy-to-read digest of the stories. Now, I realize this can seem pretty complicated at first, but once you get a few basic workflows under your belt, it all starts to make a lot more sense. So let's close this workflow. And next, let's build our own n8n workflow from scratch so we can really dig into how this works. Okay, so instead of clicking one of these pre-built templates we looked at, let's come up to the top and click Create Workflow. That gives us a completely blank canvas with just this Add First Step button we can use to add the initial trigger for our workflow. So for this example, let's say I have an email address set up where clients can email the photos they want me to use when I'm designing their publications. I'm tired of manually downloading the photos and moving them to my Dropbox where I store them, so let's create a workflow that has access to my Gmail that can detect when an incoming email has an attachment, and then automatically copies that attachment to my Dropbox account. So this will require the workflow to be able to access my Gmail, then to decide whether an incoming email has an attachment, and then access my Dropbox to copy that attachment there. And as I mentioned, every workflow, like every journey, starts with a first step. I'll click Add First Step, which opens this panel to the right asking what will trigger this workflow to start. And this is where you'll find an extensive list of triggers. Notice we have categories like Trigger Manually, which is for workflows that require you to click a button to start it. We have On-App Event, which runs the workflow when something happens that the workflow is keeping an eye on, like getting a message in Telegram or Airtable. And there are also triggers that run on a schedule, on a form submission, on a chat message, and so on. More often than not, though, you'll probably just search for the trigger that you want using the Search Nodes field here at the top. So in this case, I know I want the workflow to go into action when it sees a new message come into my Gmail account, so I'll type Gmail. I'll select the Gmail result. And you can see we have one trigger available, which is On Message Received. Let's select that and add it as our first node. And that takes us into the node's parameters and settings where we can determine how it behaves. For example, here under Poll Times, you can specify how often the workflow checks your email. The default is every minute, but you can see the other options that are available here. Below that, we have Event, which is the actual Gmail activity that triggers the workflow, and it's set to Message Received, which means the workflow runs whenever a new email arrives. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in order for this to work, the node has to have access to your Gmail account. This is set up here under this Credential to Connect With menu. Here I'll choose Create New Credential. So to give the workflow access to our Google account, we're going to connect using OAuth 2 authentication. Notice these two fields here, Client ID and Client Secret. So instead of just giving n8n your Google password, which would be insecure, OAuth 2 lets you create a special set of secure keys. To get these keys, we have to create what's called a project in our Google account. A project is like a folder that keeps track of which apps are allowed to access your Google services and what they're allowed to do. So in order to get secure keys, we have to do some work on the Google side of things. So I'll open up a new tab, and we'll go to console.cloud.google.com. If prompted, make sure you sign in with the Google account you want to access from your n8n workflow. I'm already signed in this case. And once you've done that, click Select a Project at the top of the screen. And then click New Project. Give your project a name. I'll just call mine Attachments Workflow. We can leave this location field as is and then click Create. It'll take a couple of seconds to create your project. And then we can click Select Project. Next, we'll open up this menu here on the left, and we'll come down to APIs and Services and choose Credentials. At the top here, we'll click Create Credentials and choose OAuth Client ID. Now we'll see this message that in order to create the client ID, we have to configure the consent screen. So let's click that. And then click Get Started. And on this screen, we'll just follow the project configuration steps. For the app name, just name it something that references the n8n workflow you're building. So in this case, I'll use Save Attachments. You can enter your own email address here. I'll click Next. For audience, I'll choose External, because this isn't a business account I'm using, so I don't have an organization to associate it with. For contact info, you can just put in your email address again. And finally, agree to the user data policy and click Create. And we'll see the message that OAuth configuration has been created. Okay, now let's go back to the menu, to APIs and Services and Credentials. Click Create Credentials and choose OAuth Client ID again. For application type, we'll choose Web Application. And we'll give it a name. Press Return, and we'll see that the OAuth client has been created. And now after all that, we can click Save Attachments. And here we can see our client ID and our client secret, which is what we needed to create and provide to connect our Gmail account to n8n. So I'll select and copy the client ID. Go back to my n8n tab and paste it in here. Then we'll go back to the Google Console tab, copy the client secret, and paste that into the client secret field. Now we see this Sign In with Google button. Before we click that, let's do one more thing. Here in n8n, we have this OAuth redirect URL. And it says for Gmail, use the URL above when prompted to enter an OAuth callback or redirect URL. So let's copy this. And then back in the Google Console, we have this authorized redirect URIs area. I'll click Add URI, and we'll paste in that address. Now, don't let the URI wording throw you. In our case, this is just the URL that Google will send you back to after you sign in. So when you copy the OAuth redirect address from n8n and paste it here, you're basically telling Google, after I log in, send me back to this exact spot so the connection can be completed. So I'll click Save. And now back in n8n, I'll click Sign In with Google. Now do be careful here. If your web browser has built-in pop-up window blocking, it might not look like anything has happened. So make sure you allow pop-ups here. But then you'll see this window pop up, and you can choose the email address you're signing in with. Be sure to use the one that n8n will be accessing. Now notice we see this message saying this app can only be accessed by developer-approved testers. So we have to do one more thing on the Google side of things. We'll go back to the menu, to APIs and Services, and here we'll choose OAuth Consent Screen. Over here on the left, we'll select Audience. And here we'll find Test Users, and we're going to click Add Users. And here, enter your Gmail address. I'll click Save. And we can see that has now been added under Test Users. Now we can go back to n8n and click Sign In with Google again. Select the email address we just added. We'll click Continue here. And on this next screen, you can select everything to give n8n permission to perform these actions. Now what you allow here can depend on what you want this workflow to do. In this case, I'm just going to leave everything selected and click Continue. We see the connection was successful. And now we see the message here that the account has been connected, meaning our n8n workflow can now access our Google account. I'll close that window. And back here under Parameters, we can see the Gmail account has been selected here under Credentials. We can test this by clicking Fetch Test Event. All right, so I'm actually getting an output error here. It's saying forbidden, perhaps check your credentials. And it's telling me that this API has not been used in the project, or it is disabled. And the nice thing here, it tells you what to do. Enable it by visiting this address, which I'll copy here. And I'll open a new tab to visit it. And yes, here I have to click the Enable button. And once I've done that, I should be able to return to my workflow and click Fetch Test Event again. And now we see Node executed successfully. So oftentimes you will find that if there is an error, you'll be given instructions on how to fix that error. Also, whenever you're in any of these parameters and settings areas, you have this docs link, which will provide you instructions on how to use the particular node you're using. All right, but now that we know that's working, let's click back to Canvas. And there's our first node. Now, it did take a bit of setting up, but those are typical of the steps you often have to take to securely allow an n8n workflow to access your accounts. But there is one more thing we should do with this trigger. Right now, it's going to be triggered by any email that comes into this account. I only want it to be triggered by emails that have attachments. So let's double click to go back into it. And here under Filters, I'll choose Add Filter and select Search. And we want to type exactly what it has as an example in this field, has :attachment, which is how Gmail labels emails with attachments. Now, by default, this trigger will only act on new emails that arrive once the workflow is active, so it won't go back and process your whole inbox. But if you want to be extra sure, we can click Add Filter again and set the read status to unread emails only. Okay, now we can go back to the canvas. So this first node basically tells the workflow to go into action when an email with an attachment arrives. Now we have to tell the workflow what to do with those email attachments. Let's click the plus button to add another node. Again, we'll search for Gmail. And the action we want here is get a message. That takes us into the parameters for that node. The nice thing here is we've already set up our Gmail credentials, and they're already selected in this menu up here, so we don't have to go through that whole process again. We'll leave the resource and operation menu set to message and get. In the message ID field, we need to specify the unique identifier for the email the first node is reading. We do this by clicking in here and then selecting expression. Then click this little arrow button to open up the expression window. Over here on the left, make sure the Gmail trigger area is open, and then drag ID into the expression field. We can then close this window. Lastly, turn off Simplify so we can see some more options. And then here select Download Attachments. And we'll make sure that's enabled. And now we can go back to the workflow canvas. Okay, so now our workflow is set up with a trigger to detect emails with attachments, and the second node downloads the attachment. I want the attachments to be uploaded to a Dropbox folder, so we'll click the plus button to add another node, and we'll search for Dropbox. We'll select that. And the action we want to take here is under File Actions, which is Upload a File. Now, once again, since I need this workflow to securely access one of my online accounts, I need to create a credential. Now, in this case, you can choose to connect to Dropbox using an access token or OAuth 2 like we did for Google. For a workflow that's going to be running 24/7, you'll want OAuth 2 since access tokens can expire. So let's set that up by going to Dropbox in a new tab. And we're actually going to go to dropbox.com/developers. And here we're going to click Create Apps. Under Choose an API, Scoped Access is the only option, so we'll select that. Under the type of access you need, we'll choose App Folder. So n8n will be able to upload to a specific folder and keep things organized. And then give your app a name. I'll call this From Gmail. We'll click Create App. Now in this case, this app name has already been taken. Maybe we'll try From Gmail Attachments. And there we go. On this screen, I'll scroll down a bit. And notice, just like with Google, we have an app key and an app secret, although it was called client key and client secret in Google, but it's essentially the same thing. Now, before we copy and paste those, let's go to the Permissions tab at the top and check accountinfo.write, so n8n will be allowed to add content to my Dropbox. Make sure you click Submit. Now let's go back to the settings, and we'll copy the app ID. I'll return to the n8n tab and paste that under Client ID. And we'll do the same thing for the app secret. Just show that and then copy it. And just like before, I'll copy the OAuth redirect URL. And then back in my Dropbox settings, I'll paste that in the redirect URIs area. And make sure you click Add. Back in n8n, under App Access Type, I'll choose App Folder. And let's click Connect My Account. I get the usual warnings here. I'll click Continue. and then allow. And we get the message that the connection was successful. And we'll close this window. Now in the Dropbox node parameters, we just need to add a few things. For the file path, I'm going to type Gmail attachments, and that's where I want the file attachments to go in my Dropbox. I'll also enable binary file to tell it to accept a file and not text. For the input binary field, n8n labels attachments with generic names like attachment_0, attachment_1, and so on. So this node will be looking for attachment_0. So we'll type that in there, and let's go back to the canvas. Okay, so there's our 3-step workflow that should detect incoming Gmail emails with attachments, download those attachments, and then upload them to the Dropbox folder we specified. It's time to test it out. We can run a test by clicking Execute Workflow. You can see it runs through the process. And now we have an error message from the Dropbox node. It's saying, bad request, please check your parameters. So we need to go back into the Dropbox app settings. So I see here that the app is not permitted to access this endpoint because it does not have the required scope files content right. All right, so that's something I actually left out. So go back to our Dropbox settings. And here under permissions, here I need to check files content right. So that way n8n will be able to edit the content of the folders. Again, we'll click Submit. Now this also means we need to come back, and here in the node settings, we'll click the Edit button here next to the credential and choose Reconnect. And walk through these steps again. So this is a key step anytime you make changes to the credential, whether it's through Google, Dropbox, or any other service you're connecting to through n8n, otherwise it won't see the change to the credential. Let's click Execute Workflow again. And now we get the message that the workflow has executed successfully, meaning it didn't encounter any errors. All right, but we still need to put it to a real-world test by activating it. So I'll come up here where this switch currently says inactive, and we'll switch that on. We get the workflow activated message, and it tells me the workflow will now regularly check Gmail for events and trigger executions for them. So basically, that means this workflow is now actively doing what it's supposed to do, which in this case is watching my Gmail account for incoming messages with attachments. So now I'm going to send an email to that Gmail account with an image attached and see if the workflow catches it and moves the attachment to my Dropbox folder. I'll open up a tab to go to my Gmail account. And I do see a new message here labeled Product Photo with an image attached. Let's go to my Dropbox folder. So here we have a folder generated called Apps. In there is the From Gmail Attachments folder we created. Here's Gmail Attachments. And there's the image. So that's it. My workflow is now live, and anytime a new email with an attachment arrives, n8n will automatically grab the file from Gmail and drop it right into our chosen Dropbox folder. No more downloading and re-uploading by hand. And of course, this is just one example of how you can save time and reduce busy work with n8n. From here, you could expand this workflow with filters, notifications, or even connect it to other apps you already use, all by modifying the existing nodes or by adding more nodes. So now take some time to try building your own workflows, and check out the sample workflows provided in the Hostinger n8n templates to examine more complex workflows for ideas and inspiration. And remember to use the code in the description to get an additional discount if you decide to sign up with Hostinger. If you found this video useful, please consider liking and subscribing. So until next time, I'm Garrick Chow, and we'll see you soon.